Hi everyone, in this video we're going to talk about lettering. So hand lettering is part of the classic practice of architecture. We also call it printing, and typically only capital letters are used. This is to avoid misinterpretation. You want your drawings to be absolutely as clear as possible. And also, because drawings used to be worked on by multiple draftspeople, it kept the styles clear and continuous. So we, as 21st century architects, are probably not going to have to do a whole lot of hand lettering, but it is still important for any hand-drawn work and, of course, for your student projects. So that's why we're studying it here. Some key factors in good hand lettering are the forming of each letter, forming it correctly, a consistent form for each letter throughout your work, and the spacing of the letters. This is key. All right. It turns out it's not absolutely even spacing in between. It is the spacing of the letters that's important. When we're hand lettering, we use guidelines. Guidelines are super important. So here's some important thing right here. So we have our guidelines, and then the letters will touch both at the top and the bottom of the guidelines. We're going to use a straight edge. We're not going to freehand our guidelines, and we will use a tiny triangle. I'll show you. I have a tiny one. You can use your regular one. So you're going to maintain good proportions for your letters, and this is done by eye. You can generally tell when a letter is done too broad or too narrow. And the letter spacing is based on spacing between the actual letters, okay? Equal areas for each letter. So here's some basic lettering guidelines and rules of thumb. Your minimum height for each letter is going to be an 1/8 inch with a 1/16 inch per row. Now, the exercise that I'm asking you to do later, the letters are quite a bit bigger than that, right? But minimum that you ever want to put on a page is 1/8 inch. You want to keep your letters vertical. There are other styles that use slanted letters. We're going to use a vertical style. And when you've got a letter with a curve, you typically narrow the spacing between your letters to give it some visual balance. Okay? So I'm going to let you read these guidelines on your own. Remember that you have a copy of this presentation in your Canvas module. So let's switch over to our desk view and try out some lettering. I've already got my paper taped to my board. I've got my T-square. I'm going to be using the big triangle for some longer lines and then the tiny one for lettering. And I've got my scale for some measuring. And of course, my pencil. So we're going to use the measurements that you're asked to do for this week's exercise. And the first thing to do is to draw a border on your page, and they ask you to do that 1/2 inch in. So I'll take my scale, and remember that there's one side on this that is just truly like a regular ruler. And I'll make a tiny dot. Remember, this is just a guideline. You can't even see that. You know what? I'm going to make it large, just so you can see. All right? And 1/2 inch that way, 1/2 inch that way. And I'm going to draw my border. And I'll draw my border section. Next, we're going to draw some guidelines. The first is 7/16 from the top. Let's see, there's 8/16, so here's 7. And then we go 3/8, 1/4, 3/8, and quarter, and then another 3/8, and continue. I'm going to take those tiny measurements that I made and turn them into our guidelines. Guidelines are going to be light, but for your purposes, so that you can see them on the screen, I'm going to draw them pretty dark. Okay. All right, so my guidelines are done. Let's try some lettering. I typically like to have my T-square above the guidelines, and then I will slide my tiny triangle like this. Right. So I'm going to try writing my name. You want your letters to touch both the top and the bottom of the guidelines. So I'm going to start. Doesn't need any. Alright, so how do I do? I've got my letters equally spaced with equal area, and I have them touching both the top and the bottom of my guidelines. If I was going to critique, I'd say this H is a little bit too broad, a little too wide, and my S is not equally from top to bottom. I've got the top part too wide. So this was a super quick demonstration of lettering, how you're going to set up your page and your guidelines. And now you have some work to do with a whole lot of practice. All right. Thanks, everyone.